On this episode of Race Talk Revolution, Ms. Candida Brooks and Ms. Sandra Bernabei, founding members of the Anti-Racist Alliance, discuss the topic, why we all need anti-racist education. The original air date for this program was March 24th, 2021.
Well, good morning. Good morning, good morning, good morning. And I want to welcome you to another series. This is week 2 of a new series of 8 of Race Talk Revolution. My name is Eugene Holden, and my co-host is Lane Cobb, Reverend Lane Cobb. So let me just tell you a little bit about what Race Talk is about. Race Talk Revolution, this is where we provide a platform for people from all races and cultures, lifestyles and backgrounds to come together and join like-minded people like you and I who are, tired of living in a country with systemic tension and strife, especially between races and cultures. Race Talk Revolution is where we get to learn how to respectfully talk about the many nuances of racism, ask questions, learn from each other's experience, and share our ideas about how each of us can make a difference in the world. Race Talk Revolution, it's about an hour long. And we have some special guests here. I can't wait until we get into this, where our topic today is why we all need anti-racist education. Reverend Lane?
Well, hello again, and good morning, and welcome. I have the pleasure this morning of introducing our guests this morning, and I am very excited to have them. They come with two very extensive bios, and so this morning we have just truncated those bios a little bit so we don't take time away from their presentation. Our speakers today are licensed social workers Candida Brooks Harrison, and Sandra Bernabei. And so I want to just read briefly what they're up to. Candida Brooks Harrison, MSW LCSW, is a nationally recognized consultant, speaker, and clinician with degrees in social work and education. She is the principal at the Village Enrichment Associates, which provides organizational consultation, professional development, reflective process and supervision, and direct services across race, diversity, and intersectionality. Candida is dedicated to transformative changes within systems that increase efficacy and reduce hurt and trauma within diverse and/or oppressed communities. Sandra Bernabei, LCSW, is a community organizer and private practitioner in the New York metropolitan area. She currently serves as a board member for the Center for the Study of White American Culture, member of the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond leadership team, Social Workers and Allies Against Solitary Confinement, and an advisory board member for Opus 30 Justice, advocating for wrongly convicted persons. Among her many accolades, Sandy was listed among the 30 most influential social workers alive in the 2014 Social Work Degree Guide. Both of our guests today are past presidents of the National Association of Social Workers, New York City chapter, and founding members of the Anti-Racist Alliance, an anti-racist organizing collective of New York City area human service practitioners. The Anti-Racist Alliance is building a movement to undo structural racism in our lifetime and to bring an analysis of structural racism as outlined by the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond to thousands in the New York City area. So Ms. Bernabei, Ms. Brooks Harrison, welcome. Thank you so much for being here with us. And please tell us about the work that you are doing and why we all need anti-racist education.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lane and Eugene. That introduction was like, I think probably the best introduction we've ever had. Wow, you really pulled out. Sounds good. Sounds good. Thank you. I'm really excited to be here. And I have to say that I'm really excited to see so many white faces here. Really, it's our work, And Candida and I have been bringing our message to many communities. And so I'm really happy to be here today. I always start with my story. how I came to become anti-racist. And it was in 1995. I was already a social worker, already executive director, already doing really good work. I'm sure maybe some of you are social workers or healthcare professionals or, in human services in some way. And it was just like that. And a friend of mine, Phyllis Frank in Rockland County, said, Sandy, give me $250 in 2.5 days of your life, and I promise you, you'll never be the same. I found this amazing workshop out in California. We brought it here. So out of respect for her, I took an Undoing Racism workshop. And that workshop changed my life. And the reason why it changed my life is because I became aware that I had been miseducated, that my education included a huge hole of understanding. And because I didn't understand really what racism is how it functions, and how it shows up in every system, I had a huge blind spot because I had no lived experience, of course. I could only learn from the white educators, from the white textbooks, from the white culture I lived in. And I had been practicing social work. I was a well-intended person. And what I saw was that in an effort to do good, I might have done harm. And I became, myself and other social workers in that workshop, I remember after hearing what I heard, I went through the files of my mind and I said, wow, had I known this, had I understood structural racism, and had I understood that every system in the United States has embedded in it a bias towards whites, for whites, and our beneficiaries. If I had understood that, and that the work that I needed to do was, of course, to serve people who came in need. But if I didn't understand the system that was driving that need, then I was left as an enabler. I was left just delivering services and felt like a really good person, but I didn't understand that I was doing harm. In fact, by the time I took that workshop, I had taken every cultural competence class there was. Working with the Native American, working with the Latinx, working with this, working with that. Never, ever did I have a course that said, working in white institutions, working in white culture. And so I looked at my profession and thought, had I known this, things might have been different. And myself and other social workers, including Candida, decided that all social workers had the same miseducation. In fact, there's not one discipline in this nation that demands you show proficiency and understanding of structural racism, what it is, how it functions. You could be a doctor and never understand this, how people come and show up in your practice and have been impacted by racism. You could be an attorney. It doesn't matter what degree. You never have to demonstrate that you have an understanding of structural racism, what it is, and how it impacts citizenry, and that how the situations that show up in our lives that are driven by structural racism will continue to be driven by structural racism while we're fixing broken people. And we learn that we need to turn the mirror inward and start fixing broken systems. And that was a turning point in my life. And I took the workshop with people of color and understood that it was an eye-opener for me, but it wasn't an eye-opener for a lot of others. Candida, do you want to say anything at this point? You're on mute. You're on mute.
I was going to say that's the perfect segue, because Sandy and I come to this work from totally different backgrounds, yet when we got here, the shared experience of racism and oppression in America was the same. And so my story is just that I grew up in an African-American family that also had Afro-Latinas as part of that makeup. And we knew what racism was. We felt it, even if we didn't have the structural analysis that has grown and developed over time. We definitely felt it. And I have said multiple times in all the talks that I come from a family of activists, people who knew what was wrong and knew that we had to do something to make it right. So um, I have an older sister who's 84 years old and was part of SNCC, who was, you know, out there. And I have an older brother who is 67, who was a Black Panther. And, you know, being a radical back then, he was only like 16 years old, and yet he was part of that. And a father who is multiracial, but was always treated as a second-class person. He was very clear about his Blackness, even though he was multiracial, being predominantly African, First Nation, and white. And so these people in my life grew me up. And I was born in the 60s, so I don't know anything about the 60s firsthand, but I certainly know about the 70s and had all the stories. So I don't think I had a choice but to do this kind of work. And everything that we knew, the things that we studied, the things that were talked about in my home, and even going to a predominantly Black college, I took so many history. I started as a teacher, history courses, but because it was predominantly Black, I learned what schools did not teach me. Even being in gifted programs and going to Brooklyn Tech, I did not learn any of these things in my elementary, middle school, or high school years. So it wasn't until I got to college that it started to be partnered with what my family was teaching. And I became a social worker. And this is where Sandy and I crossed paths, is because the first thing I noticed working for the largest social work agency in this area, I won't name them, but they're huge, they're everywhere, was that there was no analysis of the experience of people that I grew up with, the people that I knew, the people that we were supposedly providing services to. And without an understanding of it, we were doing harm. So that's where Sandy and I crossed paths, the doing harm part. And as the first African-American clinician in this 100 and some odd year history of this agency, to at 37 years in this child development center, there had been no one who was Black, and yet we were serving Black and Latinx children. So how do you do this and not cause harm to the people you care about and want to serve?
Mm.
And so good intentions were not enough.
Right.
Good intentions are great, but they're not enough without an analysis, because those good intentions can be just as harmful as negative intentions. So the People's Institute, we took Sandy invited Mary Pendergreen, who then invited me, and I brought my sisters who are healthcare professionals. So we showed up en masse, and we've been doing this work to shift the field of social work. I mean, we do it in other places. You know, my practice is in all systems, but our mission at that very beginning stage was to shift social work. We were social workers who had that we said that social work was steeped in social justice, but social justice for whom? Because social justice matters in terms of context. Mm. And the context of the birth of our discipline was not towards race equity or anti-racism. It was towards other groups who were marginalized. So there was no context for serving the people that we now serve, or like I said, we purport to serve in communities. So that's where we intersect.
I wanted to just share, if I could, Candida,
Sure.
The thing that I got clear about that made a huge difference in my understanding is that, look, when I was in the schools of social work, I took institutional racism. I mean, these were concepts that I had heard, but I didn't get it. I didn't understand it.
Right.
And so as a social worker, as a nurse, as a doctor, as a teacher, you see problems and you try to fix those problems and they never go away, and you're frustrated. You go like, I don't get it. No matter what we do, we can't get to the bottom of this. It wasn't until I was educated about structural racism to understand that white supremacy is so primary in our nation that, you know, the Constitution is the law of the land, right? The first article, second paragraph, they were dealing with the whole thing about taxation, right? And they said that, you know, there were so many enslaved Africans in the southern part of our country that they said, okay, if you count every single enslaved person, there would be way more people in the South than there are in the North. So for the purpose of taxation, the enslaved Africans would be considered 3/5 of a person and the Native American none. You understand, you put that in the psyche of your constitution, you put that in the psyche of your institutions, you put that in the psyche of what it means to be an American. And you realize that that bias, that dysfunction is baked into every institution at the groundwater level. It's the foundation. That's 3/5 of a human being, and Native Americans not counted at all, is at the groundwater level of our nation. And every single institution is built on that fault line. So no, if you don't get that, then you don't understand why in every institution, bar none, whites will favor better. Because of that, it was baked in. Now, once you bake some pathology like that into systems, like the analogy I use is once you put too many eggs in a cake, it's hard to get it out. And since the inception of this country, we've been trying to make this right, but we're not taught about this. And so when we're undoing racism work, we're not talking about the bigot in you and the bigot in me. You know, in undoing racism workshop, they said, take every bigot you know, put them in a spaceship, ship them out. And not a damn thing has changed in these institutions that will drive these outcomes, where whites will fare better, every institution bar none. And the darker you get, the worse you will see the outcomes for, and of course, Native Americans, almost extinction. So that distinction for me, Candida, is like social workers are working day and night. Doctors are working day and night. You know, everybody's working day and night to like remedy certain problems. They're not going to be remedied by treating the symptoms of structural racism. We have to do both.
Exactly.
Why are people poor? They're poor because they don't have money. And who is the group that has the less money in this country, right? And we just saw through this pandemic who that group is.
Right. Yes, no, absolutely. And I think that history is important. And that is like I said, my first career is as a history teacher, and having been taught in a Black university with radical thinkers, this was clear, and coming out of a radical family, this was clear. Being clear about it and being able to have a way of packaging the information so that it's accessible to other people who are not going to go get a 4-year degree around this, or who are not from the same kind of lived experiences. The Undoing Racism workshop does just that. In 2.5 days, you're immersed in the key pieces of this historical, what I call a relationship, you know, a historical relationship to power, privilege, and structural race, you know, and structural isms, racism in particular, which is the primary ism. And it also takes you through a emotional content that has you to experience it as well. And I think that this is what happens. You can take all the courses that you want, but if you don't begin to internalize that, it's very difficult to then see it. You know, our defenses as a clinician, our defenses will come up and we will talk about how we weren't there, we didn't do it, but we have to embrace that it is part of our society, and whether or not we did it, we benefit from this. And so how do we now in 2021 move to dismantle this within systems, to undo it within systems? And how do we power share? Because it does require power sharing. And even though people, good intentioned people, will talk about doing this, when it comes to shifting our systems, we're not always for it. And so that is the work that we have to do. We're not always for shifting systems. And that's where this lives. No matter who you are, it lives in the systems, in the structures that are embedded in our laws, our policies, and the practices that are derived from those laws. And the laws are the framework for our society.
Right. You know, and once we get clear about what Candida just laid out, is like, you know, I'll speak for me as a white person, but we've all been miseducated in this country. It doesn't matter what your race is. You must begin a journey of educating yourself, because this is not coming to you through standard education. And so we started organizing with social workers, and we brought thousands and thousands of social workers into this process of undoing racism so that they could do their work differently. Okay. And so, you know, the field is evolving, right? And after you do this 10, 20 years, you start understanding what needs to get done. And so I just want to put out to you a framework. There's personal education that we all need, because we've been mal-educated, we've been ill-educated, we have been insufficiently educated. So you need to seek out anti-racist education. And that's like the Undoing Racism workshop, getting to the roots. You know, if you go to the antiracistalliance.com website, I put it in the chat, under workshops, we offer these foundational workshops. Then once you get that foundation, you begin to internalize what it means to be anti-racist. And that's an inside out job. You know, you begin to see all the ways in which you have been socialized and all the decisions that you make. And we begin to question. If it feels normal, and if you've been doing business as usual, you're probably doing harm. So it's like a complete commitment to one day at a time, just begin to keep growing and keep educating yourself. But the field has evolved, and I want to just share with you the kind of language that we should be moving towards. What we want is to get a root cause analysis. We don't want just quick fix answers. We want to get to the root, that thing I was talking about. We want to get to the groundwater level. We want to get to the root of the injustice, which is, it requires that we become long distance runners for justice. It doesn't happen overnight. Right. Abolition work sometimes takes hundreds of years, and it's okay. We must begin root cause work, and to become accountable, it's called results-based accountability. It's like people who are now saying, how much did you do? How well did you do it? But can you prove that anybody's better off? So it's not okay to be a well-intended white person. It's not okay to be a well-intended social worker or a doctor. It's not about how well-intended you are. It's about, can you make a difference in the system that drives the pain and suffering and the inequities? And that's a we job. Can't do it alone. You know, so Candida's talking about the systems that she's working in. She's working collaboratively, you know, with leadership. And so you want to get to the root cause of the problem, which is at the groundwater level. And we want to see, you know, are we getting the results? Results-based accountable, be accountable for the outcomes. But it all begins with start your journey. Start your journey wherever you are.
And Sandy, I agree with absolutely everything. And yes, that is my work, which is systems change. You know, I don't go into any system that's not willing to make a long-term commitment to do this work, because in that commitment means that you are having to dismantle policies and practices and shift them. And then it takes, for any policy that is a shift, it takes 10 years for it to actually take effect. So because you have to break those internalized components that are there, it takes a long time. This is a long distance kind of
Right.
experience. I did want to just say, Sandy, one place that we don't quite agree is that I do think that there are some institutions that actually teach this. And having, like I said before, having gone to a predominantly Black institution with critical thinkers, I did learn in college these things. And I would lift up professors who have written a lot, like Delrich Hunter and the Kelly brothers, who did, one of the brothers who did Raise the Power of the Illusion. He is documented there. So you find it, but what happens? The system does not, the education system does not really honor these academics, because once again, it's baked into the system. So if you, racism is there, then you don't honor these people as being wise and scholarly. And so this is another aspect of how it actually shows up. We have to lift up those who are actually doing the work and also give the same level of prestige, you know, to Black colleges as we do others, you know. Yes. So I wanted to just put that out there.
Right.
Thank you.
Because that's a white supremacist idea that Black colleges do not have the same gravitas as certain other colleges do. And the education is different.
Sandy and Candida, thank you so very much for setting this all up. And I want to open this up now for some Q&A. And I've had a question for the last 2 or 3 minutes, because you guys, I mean, it's really good information. And I want to ask the question, and you may have already answered it, maybe I just didn't hear it. Number one, miseducation is a term that I've been using for a while. We have been miseducated for years and years and years.
Yes.
Why is it important for us to be educated in being anti-racist? Why is that important for me or for my friend? That's my first question.
Yeah, the first response, there's so many reasons. Well, and I guess there are two very simple and basic reasons. One is that racism exists, and it is the single thing that keeps humanity separated. Because as long as we have racism, we will never acknowledge our shared humanity in a way that will push us forward. It is a part of every system. It's a part of our history. We are a racially constructed society, and therefore it is invisible. And without explicit education, you can't see it. If you can't see it, you can't undo it. So that's like the most simplistic answer to it. But we want to bring what's hidden into the light so that we can do something about it. If you don't know that it exists or you don't feel it, then you never will try to change it. It's just like being a fish in the ocean. It's just normal.
Mm-hmm.
We want to show it. And so you can feel it. You go, oh, that's what's been oppressing me. That's what's keeping me from being in relationship with Jason or with Leah, because racism was there. You know.
I would like to add that, we are good people.
Mm-hmm.
We come to help and not harm. But when you don't have corrective lenses on, you do harm.
Whew.
And you must put the lens on and begin to see with some clarity. Just last week, Mary Pendergreen, she said, she's started from the beginning. She said, Sandy, do you have any writings or any podcasts about how white people can help other white people to grow and stop burdening people of color with the hurtful and harmful things that are said, and the expectation that people of color should educate white people? Wow. You know, if you're white, it's our work to put the corrective lens on, turn the mirror inward to see how well-intended often can hurt because you're not clear, and to alleviate the burden that whiteness is on people who are I guess, forced to live in a culture that is not necessarily inclusive all the time.
Thank you. I want to open this up to our Race Talk Revolution family, because as I love my tagline, because your voice matters. So if you have questions or comments, please again keep them limited to about a minute. I have a timer here. I'm good on the timer. Again, go to the bottom of your screen with your cursor, hit the reaction button, and you'll see a bar that says raise hand. If it's not there, click on the participants and see if you can find the raise hand there. Push comes to shove, just raise your hand, Good, thank you so very much. So let's start off with Sarah.
Thank you. I would really like to ask our speakers of some concrete examples of what they've been able to do to change the systems that would help to dismantle their structural racist foundations, concrete things to change the systems. Thank you.
Candida, you want to do that?
Well, I mean, so do in collaboration, I guess I could start there. One thing is that people need to join collectives. They need to be part of coalitions, because the more people, the more power. And so I'm just thinking that, Sandy, and I'm surprised you didn't raise this, but at NASW, we also support it, but Sandy is part of social workers working to end solitary confinement. I also have three client systems that are in that work as well. And there was last Sunday, a big rally, because there has been movement towards doing just that. And so, and then I would say other kinds of legislation that we've worked on. So one is at a macro level of joining in to support legislation and actually shifting systems to want to do that. In government, where I'm part of, there's also been some legislation, and they have also shifted to do that work to support legislation that will take away some of the racist laws that then you have to build policy around and then practice with. So there have been many over the last years that are specific to race, and some that are specific to race and intersections, like walking while trans, or which has to do with transgender people. And also, what is the most common misconception? Okay. So I think that, the work is constantly looking for, one, laws that we can work towards and to alleviate racism within structures. And we put in real racial equity and assessment in legislation, which maybe, these things take 5, 10, 15 years to pass, but there's still movement towards that. And what that law is, the bill that was put in was to get New York to be able to, whenever there's a new law that's being passed, that there will be an assessment towards whether or not there's an undue burden on communities of color. So if we think of things like the 1994 crime bill or the Rockefeller drug laws, if they had passed through an assessment, a racial equity assessment, they would have known, or at least considered, that communities of color would be disproportionately impacted. If we look at child welfare laws, if a if there's a disproportionate number of children of color that are placed in care, that's the most stringent piece, right? That shifting and looking at why is that the case and what do we need to put in place to support rather than, and these systems are all working towards it, but that's the work that we have to do. And Sandy said it's a long distance. It is long distance.
Right.
I could tell you more about smaller systems also, that's at a macro level, but at small systems, people that work with us at the village are shifting policies that have been racist, you know. And that is like, if we're in education, what does your greeting policy look like? What does your discipline policy look like?
Mhm.
What, how are you supporting children who may be living in poverty and not criminalizing poverty because by making their the rules not understand that, you know, the rules for how you do grading. So smaller systems are changing their policies to look, is this racist? Is there equity across other areas of diversity? That's the goal.
Mhm.
Is that every system should be evaluating, are my policies and practices racist? Are they leading to a negative outcome for the people we serve? And how are we looking at this and what can we change? So results, the outcomes matter.
Thank you.
I'd like to give
Thank
two.
you very much.
May I give two examples at like a personal level?
Mhm.
That might be helpful. I want to give an example of how things change at a personal level. I had a conversation with a man, one of these spaces last week, actually, and he said that you know, he lived in a predominantly white community, and across the way there was a park in another community that was predominantly kids of color, and he wanted his children to learn to respect people of color, and so he would bring his white children to the park where kids of color were, where they could play together. And so initially he thought like that was a great idea. But then when we were talking about it and that he could turn the mirror inward, the question started to change. Well, why is my park all white? And why is their park all kids of color? And why is it that I felt it was okay to bring my kids over to that park? And would it be okay for those kids to come over to this park? You see, when we become anti-racist, we turn the mirror inward and we take a look at ourselves. And so at the end of the conversation, he realized that the reason why the parks were neighborhood to neighborhood was because of segregation, and that by bringing his children there was not necessarily going to do anything other than to bring a white kid over to a black park, but that reverse would never be welcomed, that it wasn't all things are not equal. So that maybe he and his community needed to take a deeper look. If they wanted their children to have a multiracial experience, it's going to be a little bit deeper than bringing your kids over to a park and, you know, understanding that the reverse wasn't true.
Yeah.
But among our social workers, something as simple as, you know, this trauma-informed work. When you think of trauma, you think of what? Rape, theft, violence. Well, after you do anti-racist education, you understand that structural racism is in of itself trauma. So you begin to change the questions that you ask when you're working with somebody. And it isn't just about rape, and it isn't just about getting, perpetrated by an attacker. It's how have these systems impacted you? You know what has been done to you.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you so very much.
Bill, and may I just say something building on the more individual level, the micro level that you were talking about, Sandy. I was just thinking about parks around, I live in Brooklyn, and so I'm right on Prospect Park. And so when I'm walking around the whole park, what one would begin to see is that every park in Prospect Park doesn't look quite the same. And so when white people come, services come, you know, and when you have an analysis of how macro level systems affect us at the micro level, you would consider that. You know, the gentleman bringing his grandchildren to the other park, if more white people took their kids to the other park wouldn't be so other, because services would come. It would be cleaner. It would have more equipment that would be in repair. And so when for 15 years, I taught special educators and educators, and I would have them go do a community walk, because most of the time they didn't live in the communities that they were assigned to be student teachers in, or that they worked in. And so their assignment was to do a 10-block radius. So walk around 10 blocks and see what was in that community. Do an analysis of the resources that were there. And what their eyes began to be open, especially those who came from Long Island or were living in Jersey and were coming into this space, that all neighborhoods are not the same, you know. Yeah. Even when sanitation, something so little, how does the sanitation system affect you, right? Affect you.
Yeah.
You know.
Thank you. Yeah. I want to keep moving on, because time goes by so quickly. Joe.
Thank you, Eugene. Here's my question to both of our guests. What is the most common misconception held by participants in workshops or group work in which you have participated? I'm just curious.
Should I go, Candida?
Take that? Yeah.
Yeah, I want to say that, you know, that we are not talking about individual racism. Racism is systemic. We're talking about, you could be a bigot, you could be mean, you could be nasty. Racism is about these systems we're talking about. Exactly. Like the racist, you know, like everybody wants to say, don't call me a racist. Like, it doesn't matter whether you're racist or not. Like I said, got rid of everybody who was bigoted, nasty, evil, and just mean. None of these systems would change. Obama was Black, not one system changed, right? Because it takes a long time to build new systems. So when we do these workshops, people say, oh, I'm not racist, I don't need it. It's not about that. Nobody's saying that you're a racist. What we're saying is that all white people benefit from these systems. And so when you do nothing, it serves white supremacists. When you do nothing, just be a good, well-intended person, but you don't do anything to challenge, you're actually enabling the system. Yes, white people benefit from it, you know, but nobody's saying that, you know, you're a racist and you have to change because you're a racist. I mean, that isn't helpful. So that's the biggest misconception, that we're talking about you as a bad person. No, everybody's been socialized in this system, even people of color. And that confusion keeps us mirrored into this harmful system.
Yeah.
Thank you. Are there any other questions?
Oh,
You guys are quiet today.
There's some in the chat.
Yes, real fast.
Adine put a question in the chat.
Adine?
I put my question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, I put my question in the chat, but my question is this. It's a little step away from what these wonderful speakers have been talking about, but I wonder to what extent the great increase in guns in the United States is a reaction on the part of white America to the fear of system change.
I would say absolutely. I would say absolutely.
I think it's so complicated. Yes, that is true. And every time there is progress in some way, we see an uptick of people purchasing weapons. And they have always purchased weapons. You know, holding guns outside of New York has always been a thing. You know, part of my family is from North Carolina, and white people have always had guns. The only difference down there is that some Black people also have guns, you know. And I would say that ever since I was a kid, there has been, and this is what I was saying about the radical education, there's always been this thought within the community that, and for many reasons, that people were often waiting for the race wars to come. Like, this is real, that there are people, and what's happening now is that we are seeing those people out in the open. I think the gift of our last president was that everyone kind of looked at the camera, but he was a gift in a way, because he brought what was the underbelly, the negative underbelly, into the light. And so the things that communities of color have always known, have always been told, have been seeing, became everyone's knowledge. And so that question, like I said, is just very complicated. Yes, and is, you know, the answer to it. They're simultaneously true. Yeah. And when another, you know, because I really do pay attention to like statistics and trends in our country, another thing is that when Democrats are in, and this, like, I don't care where people sit in their politics, because I grew up where there were people who could have different political thought, yet listen to each other. We're not there right now, but Democrats in power often mean uptick in guns, because people are afraid that their guns will be taken away from them. So there are all these pieces that make it so complicated, you know.
Yeah, you know, Candida, I'm thinking, you know, like the guns and the voting thing. When I hear about the election was stolen, I'm hearing that it's not like they think it really was stolen, but what they're saying is that a bunch of illegal people who are not supposed to be voted, and they stole the election. Right? So now they're trying to get those people who voted to not vote next time. Who are those people?
Yeah. And this is not new, you know, like, you know, one of the things is we try to do is take a historical view. This is not new. This has always been. We've had voter suppression ever since people who were not white males could vote. Right. We have voter suppression with women. We have voter suppression with people of color, because there is the power, right? If you can vote people in, then you now have to share power, which means systems will change. This is the history, you know. We are not different than our history. It's just the manifestations look a little bit differently, you know, people, but it's the same thing.
Yep.
Yeah.
I have a question in the chat by Virgie Cooper, who asks, I am not a social worker or educator, but I'm interested in the Undoing Racism workshop. Does it lend itself to those who are not social workers? Yes. Or educators?
If you're human, you need it.
Exactly. And it wasn't, you know, just a little bit, the People's Institute did not begin with social workers. It was really community based, and it was about communities learning this. And that's the history of it. When Sandy and I and all the other Anti-Racist Alliance folk, we wanted to bring this to social work. Like I said, Mary and I were in the same institution, and we knew that people were coming out of social work school not knowing, you know, they were ignorant and they were causing harm. Sandy was operating in other social work entities. We saw that in the universities, it wasn't happening. So this was just a movement of this group of people who were social workers, but we're so much more. And the People's Institute was not about social work. The work that I do is not about social work. It's in all systems. Justice systems, education system, healthcare system.
Right.
Go into systems.
In the chat box, I put a link to the trainings, okay? Yeah. Because the People's Institute can't be everywhere. And so we have an expanded list of workshops delivered by trainers of the People's Institute called Getting to the Root. So you just need to know that your anti-racist education just must begin, okay? And we're recommending that you start with somebody who gives a root cause analysis of what racism is and that it's structural in its nature and has been around for a long time. People's Institute's been around for 40 years. They have trained hundreds of thousands of people. So
Thank you.
you don't want to pop up. You just don't want to pop up training. That's what I'm saying.
Faith, my dear friend Faith. Hello there.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good.
This has been so valuable. And there's several things I like about it. One, the first time I ever heard about this miseducation, it offers us a grace to be able to step into it without feeling super, super guilty. And yet I feel like I should have known better. But I really appreciated the comment about the Constitution and the basis that we began on and how that is, because I think that's a really good point to be able to begin a conversation with. So anything that can begin a conversation in a non-confrontational way feels really good to me. So all of these little things that you have said that says this is what it is really is about is important. And I thank you very much. And I thank Elaine and Eugene for having these.
Thank you, Faith. Thank you so much. Leah.
Hi, thank you so much, Sandra and Candida. I've taken 2 anti-racism trainings this year, and I've become very, as you said, Candida, since Trump shed the light on all this racism. And I thank you for that. You can almost thank Trump for starting this conversation. And that's a very positive spin on it. So, but I wanted to ask you, of course, like every time I hear about another training, I feel like I want to do it. And this year I've gotten involved with some Black organizations, Black run organizations, and I'm trying to figure out how to get other white people to take courses. And if you had any advice on that. I'm focused on a group of Unitarian Universalists, so they're pretty liberal to begin with, but I need some help in ideas to get people motivated.
Leah, one of the things that I'm able to do as a white person is to share the impact that education has on me, and to share a sense of restored humanity, that I didn't realize that my humanity had been so damaged. And so when you share your story about how an anti-racist training actually restores humanity and the difference that it makes, you know, and what we found in our organizing around undoing racism, you can't get everybody, but you want to start harvesting people that want this. We want people who want this. Because I'll have to tell you something, you can exhaust yourself trying to convince somebody. No, there are people who want this, but they don't know where to go. You know, and that's how we organized. We didn't really bring in the resistors. We brought in people who who understood that we needed to do something differently to get a different outcome. So I just want to say, share your story, share your hope, you know, and look for people who want to work with you towards change. And there's a lot of good white people who want it. They just don't know that they're doing harm. Just don't know it. I think being a well-intended white person is good enough. Like men, not for nothing. Well-intended men think that's enough. No, 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 no. You got to go a little deeper than being a well-intended guy, right? To end sexism and to end violence against women and stuff. Candida, what do you think?
Because of the time,
Oh, okay. Go ahead.
We have time for one more question. And I want to get Eddie in there, and then we're going to go ahead and close this out.
Hi, Eddie.
So much.
Hi there.
Hi, Eddie.
Hi. So Sandy, personally, I want to thank you for being a lifeline for many, many, many years. certainly in the metropolitan New York area. I don't know what it's like beyond, but for us who have been kind of trying to get at this work for a long time. And the one thing I haven't really heard today is that I keep running into, could you talk about this work being messy work? Because I keep running into that messiness all the time.
Long distance runners for change.
Listen, yeah, this work
Ooh.
goes to one's identity. That's the messiness. And whenever you challenge someone's identity to think about it, to reflect upon it, it can take you into disequilibrium, right? To say it nicely, it puts you in disequilibrium. And so we should expect it, you know, that's what's going to happen before you fall back into that comfortable place. So people should, we do tell people, don't, if you're not willing to be a long distance runner, to commit to the flow of this, then it is oftentimes maybe work that you should wait to start, so that you don't have this pendulum swing back over, you know.
And I say, ask yourself, what kind of a human being do you want to be? Racism dehumanizes. The work of undoing racism restores our humanity.
Mm-hmm.
You do this work because it defines what kind of a human being do you want to be. You want to be somebody who's got a set of glasses on, or do you want to be like, you know, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what the alternative is.
Ooh, Candida, Sandra, thank you guys so much for being here. Thank you for all of the questions that everybody was asking, even in the chat. Thank you so very much for joining us today. And I want to thank all of the speakers again, and you are always welcome back. So then also, in Race Talk Revolution, please join us next week for another episode when we will continue to celebrate women with our guest, Rory Geller Mohammed. She's an anti-racism coach who has developed a platform that helps white women build their capacity to work for racial equity and justice in their lives and community. This promises to be, like all of them, a fabulous discussion. So please don't miss that. And please, like I like to say, bring a friend, tell a friend, be a friend.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you, ladies.
Everybody.
An absolute honor hosting you. Thank you for this wonderful information, for making time for us. And we do welcome you back. This information is so valuable. Anti-Racist-Alliance.org, yes? .com, antiracist-alliance.com. And the Undoing Racism workshop can also be Googled. And please do check out these ladies, read their full bios. It's very impressive. And thank you for being here. Race Talk Revolution is a movement, and we are so pleased to have us all working together.
Thank you.
Namaste, everybody.
Bye, folks.
Take care.